A man alone in deep space, surrounded by a fear-powered alien mist designed to paralyze the mind and crush the will. But when the vapor hit his lungs, he smiled. Why? Because fear was nothing new to him. This wasn't the beginning of his panic. It was the moment he took control. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to the channel and show some love with a thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's jump into the story. Leon Hadley didn't mind the silence. In fact, he preferred it. That's why he always volunteered for the night shift aboard Deep Space Processing Unit Delta 6, a rusted metal box floating in orbit around a lonely asteroid. There were 10 crew members on the rig, but once the others went to sleep, the whole place belonged to him. He liked it that way. No small talk, no questions. Just the low hum of the generators and the comforting tap of his fingers against an old paperback book. He sat at the main console in a worn-out chair that creaked every time he moved. The rig wasn't in great shape, but that was true for most things out here, including Leon himself. He was in his late 40s, with streaks of gray in his beard and deep lines around his eyes. A bottle of cheap anxiety pills sat beside his mug of lukewarm coffee. He popped one in his mouth, dry swallowed, and turned another page of The Beginner's Guide to Freshwater Fishing, a book he'd read at least 200 times. He had never fished a day in his life. The console blinked, with minor system warnings, coolant levels dropping, waste processor overdue for service, lighting flicker in corridor C. Leon ignored them all. If it wasn't on fire, it could wait. The company wouldn't send a rescue crew unless the whole rig exploded. Even then, they'd probably just bill the survivors. He scratched at his arm absent-mindedly and reached for his coffee when the proximity alarm buzzed. The sharp sound startled him, loud and out of place. It had only gone off twice before, once during a meteor storm, once when corporate sent an inspection shuttle. Leon squinted at the screen. An object was approaching. No transponder, code, no ID, just a faint shape moving steadily closer. He leaned in. Probably some stray rock, he muttered, though his voice didn't sound convinced. Unidentified object entering visual range, chirped the station's artificial assistant, Nina. Her voice was supposed to be calm and friendly, but it had the effect of a dentist's drill. Leon rubbed his eyes and clicked on the external camera feed. The screen showed something. Blurry, unclear. Not a ship. Not a rock either. It looked like a cloud? A pale, shifting mass floating through space, pulsing gently like it was breathing. Leon frowned. He'd seen plenty of strange things in deep space, but this was different. It wasn't debris, it wasn't natural, it was moving too smoothly, too deliberately. Run a scan, he said, eyes fixed on the screen. Unable to complete scan, Nina replied. Object does not match known materials. Energy signature unknown. Leon stood up, the chair groaning in protest. He grabbed his toolkit, more out of habit than necessity. The heavy metal box clanked as he moved down the narrow corridor toward the observation deck. The lights flickered overhead, dimming for just a moment. Leon didn't slow down. He had long since stopped being afraid of shadows and broken lights. Anxiety had been part of his life since he was a kid. He didn't know what it felt like not to worry. The observation deck wasn't much, just a small room with a thick glass window looking out into the void. Leon stepped in and stared. The object was closer now, still looked like a cloud. A soft, swirling fog. It moved in slow waves like smoke underwater. He pressed a hand against the window, watching as the thing began to shift shape. Not fast, not threatening, just changing, adapting. It formed a vague shape like a figure standing upright, though still formless and fluid. The lights flickered again. Then they went out completely. For a moment there was nothing but the sound of his own breathing. Emergency lights kicked in with a dull red glow. The hum of the station system stopped. The air felt colder, thinner. Leon stayed still. He wasn't afraid, at least not in the way most people might be. His heart raced, but that was normal. Everything was always racing. He didn't panic anymore. He'd already lived in panic so long that it felt like background noise. "Nina?" He called. No. Answer. He reached for his radio. Bridge to crew quarters. Anyone awake? Static. He tried again. Mila, Reese. Come in. More static. Leon grunted. Of course. He turned, toolkit in hand, and walked quickly toward the living quarters. As he moved, he noticed the mist. It was seeping through the vents now, thin tendrils snaking along the floor, glowing faintly in the red light. He slowed down. The mist wasn't cold or hot. It just was. It slid along the ground, curled around his boots, and rose upward like it had a mind of its own. Then it happened. A burst of green vapor hissed from the vent above, hitting him full in the face. He inhaled before he could stop himself. His body froze. Not from fear, but from confusion. The smell filled his nose instantly, chemical, sharp, but familiar. It smelled like the old paint shop his dad used to run, like engine cleaner, like rust and rain and steel pipes in the summer heat. Leon blinked. Well, I'll be damned, he said. Smells like Houston. He chuckled. Not out of amusement, but out of sheer disbelief. Whatever this thing was, it wanted to scare him. But Leon had already been living with fear every single day, so the game wouldn't be that easy. Leon moved through the quiet corridor, his footsteps echoing against the metal floor. The emergency lights painted everything in red, giving the rig the look of a dying heartbeat. He gripped his toolkit tighter, the weight of it comforting in his hands. The mist was spreading faster now, slithering through the ventilation system, like it knew the way. Leon tried his radio again, but all he got was static. The rest of the crew should have been awake by now. Something was wrong. Very wrong. He reached the door to the crew quarters and tapped the manual override. The panel blinked twice before the door slid open with a hiss. Inside, the bunks were empty. Not messy, not panicked, just empty. Personal items were left behind. A half-eaten snack bar, a photo taped to the wall. Mila's favorite scarf tossed over the end of her bed. Leon stepped in slowly, scanning the room. There were no signs of struggle, no damage, no blood. It was like they had all just vanished. On the captain's bunk, a tablet still blinked with power. Leon picked it up. The last file was a video feed. He tapped play. Grainy security footage filled the screen. It showed the crew sleeping in their bunks. Then, without warning, the mist began pouring in from the vents. Slowly at first, then thicker, swirling like smoke in water. The fog moved with intent, forming shapes that hovered above each person. The shapes bent down over the crew members, covering their faces. None of them woke up. Within seconds, each sleeper was swallowed by the fog, and then they were gone. The video ended. Leon stared at the screen, the knot in his stomach twisting tighter. He wasn't just alone. He was left behind. The others had been taken, and whatever took them didn't need violence. Just fear. He left the room and headed for the rig's central data core. If the AI was still running in the background, it might have recorded more data. As he walked, the mist curled around his boots again, but never attacked him. It seemed curious, hesitant, like it didn't understand him. Leon's thoughts spun as he tried to piece things together. What if the mist needed fear to function? To feed, maybe? If that was true, then why wasn't it affecting him? He still had anxiety. He always had. But maybe that was the difference. He didn't react the way it expected. He didn't freeze. He didn't run. Fear didn't control him anymore. It just lived in the background. The data room was dim, but still operational. A few screens flickered weakly, their systems running on emergency power. Leon sat down at the main terminal and began typing. He dug through logs and backup files, searching for anything that might explain the mist. Most of the logs were routine. Maintenance reports, complaints about failing filters, worn-out batteries, supply shortages. Nothing useful. Then he found a research file left by Dev Rannon, the ship's biologist. The subject line was vague. Unusual readings, 47B. Leon opened it. 2 weeks earlier, Dev had logged strange energy patterns coming from the asteroid's core. The readings didn't match any known elements. There was mention of possible organic traces. Dev had written, "It's probably nothing, but I've never seen signals behave like this before. It almost feels like a pulse." Leon sat back, thinking. They'd drilled into the asteroid, hit something unusual, and shrugged it off. Maybe they shouldn't have. Maybe they woke something up. A second file confirmed it. It was a partial translation of markings found deep inside the asteroid. The language wasn't human. The AI's translator had struggled, but a few words stood out. The harvest, the dreaming, the fear. Leon's chest tightened, not from panic this time, but realization. These creatures fed on fear. It wasn't just about scaring people, it was about survival. They harvested emotional energy like fuel. They didn't kill quickly. They drained slowly. And now, one of the escape pods was missing. Leon checked the launch logs. The pod had launched 30 minutes ago. Destination unknown. Whoever, or whatever, was inside had used the rig's comm systems to send a series of encrypted signals into space. The mist wasn't just feeding. It was scouting, testing. And now it was reporting back. He stood quickly. Earth. The signal could be heading there, and if this thing spread, the panic alone would be enough to feed an invasion. Mass fear, chaos. A buffet for a predator that thrived on terror. Leon grabbed a coil of cable and stuffed it into his toolkit. He needed to stop the signal, or destroy the transmitter, or both. His mind was racing, but his hands were steady. Strange how clear everything became when fear had nowhere left to hide. He stepped into the hallway and paused. The mist was thick now, rising around him. 3 figures formed from the fog, tall, vague shapes with pulsing, glowing cores. They didn't move to strike. They just hovered there, watching, studying. Leon inhaled deeply, letting the familiar, chemical smell fill his lungs. His heart didn't race. His hands didn't shake. Whatever these things were, they still didn't understand him. "Well," he said softly, "you picked the wrong guy to frighten." He turned and walked toward the engine bay, toolkit in hand. Behind him, the mist followed, silent, curious, and increasingly frustrated. The lights above Leon flickered. As he entered the engine control bay, the mist following him like a slow-moving tide. He didn't look back. There was no point. Whatever these things were, they were watching him, trying to figure him out. But so far, they hadn't attacked. They just kept observing, like scientists puzzled by a test subject that wouldn't react the way it should. And Leon wasn't giving them what they wanted: fear. The rig's engine bay was a mess of metal, cables, and forgotten maintenance logs. The machines here were loud when active, but now they were silent, only lit by the dull red of the emergency backup systems. Leon moved quickly, navigating with ease. He knew this place like the back of his hand. Years of solitude and routine had made every pipe and panel familiar. It had once brought him comfort. Now it was the only thing keeping him sane. He approached the auxiliary data console and connected a bypass cable. His goal was simple: access the deeper layers of the AI's backup memory. Whatever was left unsaid in Dev Ronan's research, logs might still be in the system's shadow memory, untouched by the normal interface. He typed with purpose, fingers moving faster now. The screen blinked, resisted, then opened a hidden folder labeled 47B Legacy. There were files, dozens of them. Most were corrupted, full of static and incomplete data. But one had survived, marked with a personal tag: Final Theory. Leon opened it. The screen filled with Dev's voice in text form. The message was raw, unpolished, like it had been typed in a rush. "If anyone finds this, stop drilling. We triggered something buried beneath the rock. It's not just alien material. It's alive. Not alive like bacteria or mold. Alive like aware. Thinking. Watching. I think it's been here for centuries, maybe longer. Sleeping. The energy readings show patterns, like brainwaves. When we pierced the inner chamber, the pattern changed. It woke up. Leon kept reading, eyes scanning each line. I believe the mist is a form of it. Not a byproduct, but a piece. A limb, maybe. Or its voice. It feeds by releasing a vapor into the air. The vapor triggers fear. Real, deep fear. It floods the nervous system, spikes adrenaline, cortisol, all the panic responses. Then it collects those chemicals somehow. Absorbs them. I think the others were drained. No struggle. No fight. Just gone. And here's the worst part. It's learning. Watching how we respond. Trying to evolve its approach. The AI translation of the markings calls it the harvest. I don't know what that means exactly, but I know it's not good. Leon leaned back slowly, processing what he'd read. The thing wasn't hunting him. It was studying him. And the fear toxin it used, the green vapor, was supposed to break him. But it hadn't. His brain, soaked in anxiety since childhood, reacted differently. Maybe the familiar fear was already burned out. Maybe his nerves were so used to ringing alarm bells that nothing new got through. The console blinked again. A secondary notification. A data burst log. Leon clicked it open. The screen filled with encoded transmissions. Each had been sent from the rig's communication hub in the last hour. All outbound. None human-readable. But one part was clear. Visual components. Embedded star maps. Highlighted sectors. Trajectories. Earth, every major human world was marked. Densely populated cities flagged. High-traffic space routes traced in bright red. They weren't just experimenting, they were planning. Leon stared at the map and felt a familiar pressure in his chest. Not panic, not terror, determination. If this thing made it to Earth, it wouldn't need weapons. Fear would be everywhere, broadcasted, streamed, amplified by the very systems meant to keep people informed and connected. It would gorge itself on fear and grow stronger. He checked the escape pod status again. One pod was gone, launched not long after the first mist sighting. It hadn't been registered under any crew ID, which meant the being had taken it, or, worse, someone infected by it had. The pod could carry enough data and mist to start the harvest elsewhere. Leon stood quickly, unplugged his gear, and slung the cable over his shoulder. He had one choice now. Get to the remaining escape pod, stop the signal, destroy the source. Somehow. The mist had thickened while he worked. 3 shapes stood in the corner of the room now, each vaguely humanoid, taller than him, barely visible except for the soft glow of their shifting forms. They didn't move. They just stood, silent and still, as if waiting for a decision. Leon looked at them. "You think I'm afraid of you," he said quietly. "But I've been afraid for most of my life, every single day. And guess what? I'm still here." He walked toward the exit. The shapes didn't stop him, they just followed, as if unsure of what to do next. Whatever this thing was, it didn't understand resistance that didn't look like fear. But Leon wasn't resisting it. He was surviving it. That made him different, maybe dangerous. The hallway ahead was dark. The only working lights flickered above the escape pod bay. Leon took a breath, tightened his grip on the toolkit, and stepped forward. He didn't have a plan yet, but he had purpose. And for now, that was enough. The harvest had started, but it wasn't going to be easy, not with him in the way. Leon moved through the corridor like a man on a mission, not a trace of hesitation in his steps. The mist trailed behind him, gathering and dispersing in quiet waves. It had learned by now that he was different. He didn't scream. He didn't run. He didn't react the way it expected. Whatever it was, whatever intelligence lived inside the swirling vapor, it didn't understand a man who had already made peace with fear. Leon wasn't fearless because he was brave. He was fearless because fear had lost its grip on him a long time ago. The escape pod bay was just ahead, dimly lit and eerily quiet. He stopped before turning the corner, crouched behind a utility cabinet, and peeked around the edge. There it was, the last operational pod, still intact, still running. But the space around it wasn't empty. At least a dozen mist beings floated there, their shapes more defined now than before. Limbs, heads, spines of moving fog. They clustered, near the pod as if guarding it. The missing crew members were nowhere in sight. The other two pods were wrecked, split open and leaking coolant across the floor. It was clear. The last pod was his only shot. Leon backed away and slid down the wall, thinking. Direct combat was suicide, but he had tools, he had knowledge, and he had something they didn't expect. A calm mind in the middle of chaos. Slowly, carefully, he unpacked what he had left. From his toolkit, he pulled a heat coil, a pressure hose, and a fuel cell for the maintenance drones. He wired them, together, hands steady, building something ugly but effective. A portable flamethrower. The pilot flame sparked to life with the flick of a cigarette lighter. The sound was small, but it felt like thunder in the silence. He stood, adjusted the weight of the device on his back, and stepped into the open. The mist beings noticed him immediately. They turned in unison, shifting and stretching, then began to move. Several floated toward him, releasing thick clouds of green vapor. Leon didn't flinch. He walked straight into it, breathing in deep. The smell filled his lungs. Burnt metal, old oil, Houston smog in the summer. It reminded him of home. It reminded him that this was just another fight, another bad day. And bad days never scared him. He squeezed the trigger. A burst of flame roared forward, bright and hot. The closest mist being screamed, not in sound but in motion. Its form twisted violently before scattering like steam. The others backed off quickly, hesitant now. They weren't used to resistance. They weren't used to someone burning down the walls they thought were invisible. Leon pushed forward, sweeping the flamethrower side to side. The heat forced the creatures to retreat. He reached the pod, slammed his palm on the access panel, and the hatch opened with a hiss. He didn't climb in right away. Instead, he reached for the rig's emergency transmitter just above the bay door. He input a coded command that would override the station's AI lockouts and overload the core. It was a self-destruct, something buried deep in the system, meant only for the most extreme emergencies. This qualified. The countdown began. 5 minutes. Leon climbed into the pod and sealed the hatch. The interior lit up, clean and quiet, a sharp contrast to the chaos outside. He activated the launch protocol, set coordinates for intercept with the path the stolen pod had taken, and buckled in. The pod trembled as the clamps released. Then, with a low rumble, it shot forward into space. Through the small viewport, he watched Delta 6 shrink into the distance. The station he had called home for so many years, now just a distant metal shell. Behind him, red lights blinked like dying stars. And then, a flash. Silent, but brilliant. The rig exploded from within, tearing apart as flames and debris scattered into the void. The mist didn't survive the fire. Leon leaned back in his seat. His hands were sore. His clothes were singed. But he was alive. A small console beeped beside him. Navigation showed the stolen pod only an hour ahead. With enough fuel, he'd reach it before it got to Earth. He didn't know what he'd find. Maybe another mist being, maybe something worse. But it didn't matter. He would stop it, or die trying. He sipped from a water pouch and stared out the window. Stars drifted by, calm and endless. In that moment, he realized something strange. He didn't feel scared, he didn't feel anxious. He just felt ready. Somewhere out there, a creature built from terror was still trying to understand why one man wouldn't break. And maybe it never would. Leon smiled. Good, he muttered. Let them wonder. He leaned back, closed his eyes for just a moment, and waited for whatever came next. Not as a victim, not as a hero, but as a man who knew what fear looked like and finally had nothing left to fear.